Shadows of war, the Middle East on the brink. It sounds intense, right? We're talking about a region teetering on the edge, where the threat of a massive conflict is growing literally by the day. So let's just dive straight into what's going on.
Wow, I mean, a warning doesn't get much clearer or more chilling than that, does it? Iran's supreme leader isn't just talking tough here. He's drawing a line in the sand, basically promising a full-blown regional war. This is what's setting the stage for this incredibly tense standoff.
So that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. Because you see, this isn't just a simple showdown between America and Iran. Not at all. The really complicated part is what their allies are doing. Their positions are shifting, and it's creating this tangled, totally unpredictable situation across the whole region.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the core US-Iran standoff. Then, we'll check in on the key players, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, and see how they're reacting. And finally, we'll zoom out and try to make sense of what this all means for the Middle East.
Okay, so let's start with the standoff itself. Picture this. At the beginning of the year, it really felt like the entire region was just holding its breath. Everyone was watching, hoping, just trying to avoid another huge, devastating war.
And look at how fast things heated up. On January 2nd, you've got a pretty aggressive tweet. But just a couple weeks later, the vibe is still cautious. Then, bam, by the end of the month, Saudi Arabia is warning that doing nothing is the real danger. And by early February, Israel's tone has completely changed. We're talking about a shift from caution to talk of war in just a matter of weeks. That's a dangerously fast escalation.
All right, let's zoom in on one of America's key allies, Israel. Because honestly, their change of heart here has been maybe the most dramatic of all.
I mean, look at this. It's a complete 180. In January, Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically saying, hey, let's be careful, revolutions should happen from within. But fast forward just 1 month, and he's sending his generals to Washington to talk about strike plans. It is an absolutely staggering reversal.
So, you gotta ask, what happened? What could possibly change their minds so completely, so fast? Going from let's be cautious to let's talk about military strikes in just a few weeks is a huge deal.
Well, it really boils down to two things: feeling safer and getting nervous. On one hand, you have a huge U.S. military buildup, like an aircraft carrier showing up. That makes Israel feel like, okay, we're protected. But on the other hand, there was this growing fear, a nervousness that if the U.S. started talking to Iran, they might end up with a really weak nuclear deal. And that deal could be a lifeline for an Iranian regime that Israel saw as weak and vulnerable.
Okay, now let's talk about another major player, Saudi Arabia. Their thinking also changed, but it was, well, a lot more nuanced, a lot more strategic.
What we're seeing here is a classic strategic hedge. At first, they were very clear. Nope, no strikes. You can't even use our airspace. But now, the position is much more, look, we'd rather not have an attack, but if it's going to happen anyway, we absolutely want to be in the room when it's being planned. So they've shifted from trying to prevent it to wanting to be a part of it.
And this quote right here from the Saudi defense minister really nails their new thinking. The fear isn't just about what happens if a war starts. Now, it's also about the fear of what happens if nothing is done. The worry is that inaction will just embolden Iran, making them an even bigger problem down the road.
But, not everyone in the region is getting on board with this tougher stance. Let's shift gears and look at Turkey, which is actually doing the exact opposite. They're trying to pull everyone back from the brink of war.
Yeah, Turkey's game plan is pretty straightforward. First off, they share a huge border with Iran, so the last thing they want is a war next door that creates a massive refugee crisis. That's their biggest fear. So what are they doing? They're pushing the U.S. to keep talking, telling them to basically tackle the issues with Iran one by one. At the same time, you've got President Erdogan flying around the region trying to build up a group of countries that are all pushing for a diplomatic solution.
And here's some important context you need to know. Turkey's influence in the region has been growing a lot, especially since the Syrian revolution. But that new power also creates tension. Israel, for one, is super suspicious of what Turkey is really up to, especially because of Turkey's ties to Hamas.
So, let's pull all these threads together. What do we have? We've got a region where alliances are like shifting sands. And for every country, there's this weird mix of fear and opportunity.
This chart really puts it all in perspective, doesn't it? You have 3 major U.S. allies and 3 totally different takes on what to do. Israel is all for military action now because they want to weaken Iran. Saudi Arabia is kind of hedging its bets. They'll get involved if they have to keep Iran in check. And then you have Turkey, which is firmly against it because they're terrified of the instability it would cause.
And this, right here, is the core of the whole issue. This is why it's all so dangerous. For some countries, a regional war is a nightmare scenario, just total chaos. But for others, well, for others it's actually an opportunity, a chance to completely redraw the map and shift the balance of power in their favor.
So, in the end, it all boils down to this one question. You've got this entire region caught between two powerful forces, the absolute fear of a devastating war and the tempting possibility of strategic opportunity that a war might create. And what happens next? Well, that really depends on which of those forces wins out.